This is Jewish Spotlight, a weekly television program presented by Chabad Lubavitch of Long Island, featuring various aspects of modern Jewish life and Jewish culture. Now, here is your host, Rabbi Tuvia Teldin.
Shalom, welcome to the Jewish Spotlight. Tonight we're going to be talking about a very interesting aspect of Judaism, one that you probably haven't heard too much about. You know, a lot of times we experience Judaism in the synagogue, or maybe we go to a visit for something in the city, maybe the theater, whatever it might be. But in the learning about Judaism, in that process, there are a lot of ways to find out what Judaism means. You can sit with a book, you can read something very interesting, you could study Torah, but you could also listen to stories. And stories have, through the history of the Jewish people, been a tremendous source of not only inspiration and knowledge, but also of a way of connecting to God and being filled with a sense of the meaning of what Judaism is really all about. And to find out about that very interesting dimension of Judaism, we have with us today two people who have spent years telling and researching and finding out and writing about just that, Jewish stories. So we're happy to have with us today two people who have been involved with this for many years. We have Dr. Eugene Leibowitz and Dr. Annette Leibowitz also. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and we're looking forward to hearing some of your stories. So I want to first hear about how did you get involved in spreading stories about Judaism?
First of all, I have to tell you a story about the story.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
That's a true storyteller.
It illustrates it best. The story is told of the Rizhiner Rebbe, whose name was Yisrael Friedman.
All right.
And Rizhin is the town where he lived. So they called him the Rizhiner Rebbe. And he had quite a court, and people would come to him to write the prefaces to their various books. And one day, two people came in simultaneously to his study hall. One had written on Jewish law, and one had written on stories. So his sexton assumed that he would write the preface to the book on Jewish law first, but he said, well, I'll just go check with the Rebbe. So he knocks on the door to the Rebbe's room, and he says, Rebbe, there's two people sitting out here. One wrote on Jewish law, one wrote on stories. I know you'll see the person who wrote on Jewish law first. And the Rebbe said, no, I'll see the storyteller first, because our Torah begins with stories. And if it wouldn't be for the stories, there would be no basis for anything else to follow, because we know the way the Torah is structured. It's structured with stories, and then the law follows.
Very true.
So that's the.
We start off with the story of Genesis, of course, the creation of the world, the story of the exodus of the Jews out of Egypt, and then we begin with the laws.
Right.
Very true.
So, and then we've done quite some extensive research, and we found that stories are used to inspire, to impact, to help people explore their roots, to truly find out a connection between man and God. There is a saying that the rabbis say, if you really want to know God, learn stories. Stories can be allegorical, they can be figurative, they can be poetic, but they're all reach the point of man's relationship to God.
Interesting. Rabbi Leibowitz, can you tell me, how did you get involved in telling stories yourself? What was it that first motivated you to make that a key part of your own practice? Because, of course, you were a practicing rabbi for 40 years, I believe, in Miami Beach, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, let's hear about that.
That's where I found out that the only effectiveness I possibly could have is by telling stories, because I have been, like most rabbis, a sermonizer every Friday night, every Shabbos, every opportunity to tell sermons. And I don't think that I affected too many people by sermons. So I came upon this idea because I always liked to tell stories. In fact, when I was a youngster in the Hebrew school, the thing that motivated me the most was that the teacher told stories, and I was very excited about it. And I found out that these stories are more effective than actually speaking from the pulpit, no matter how eloquent I might have thought I was.
But he said, are you telling me that all these years I've been telling sermons, you don't think that anybody had ever heard anything from my sermons?
Well, I'll tell you, but don't tell anyone.
Okay. We'll keep it a secret between you and I.
Us.
Although I'll tell you, the fact is, I remember a number of years ago that someone came to me afterwards, and they told me that they remembered a story from one of my sermons, and it was a story that I myself didn't remember, but it had such an impact on them, and I realized the same thing that you realized. I wish I was a better storyteller. Maybe I'll start to apprentice under you.
But you know that I always use this little incident perhaps it's not completely the truth, but it's also very close to the truth. In 40 years, I met many people in the congregation, and when I didn't recognize them, and they say, "You don't recognize me?" I come every Friday night, every Shabbos, I say, "Close your eyes." Then I'd recognize them. That's how I felt when I would give a sermon. It was an opportunity for them to close their eyes. But Rav Nachman said, there are those people who tell stories and put people asleep, and there are those who tell stories and they awaken to the story.
Right.
That wake them up. That's what I found, and
Well,
we've been very effective in
If
that.
I can insert a story, you know the story about the rabbi and the taxi cab driver who go up to heaven, and of course they're waiting there to get in, and the taxi cab driver goes straight in, and the rabbi is told to wait on the side. So afterwards the rabbi says to God, he says, "What is this? I've been serving you for so many years, how come you put me on the side?" And he goes right in. So of course God says to him, "Listen, when you say a sermon, everybody sleeps. When he starts driving his taxi, everybody starts praying to God."
Praying to God. That's
So as a
right.
result, I think with the stories, we also were able to
Yeah.
wake people up and be able to give them a
Absolutely.
certain type of connectedness. I think that's really what a story does. No,
Right.
Dr. Leibowitz,
I-
what is the accomplishment of a story? What is a story? Why does it penetrate a person to such a greater degree?
Well, let me give you an example.
Okay.
Okay, because I only think in examples.
Okay.
There's a story.
You're a born storyteller, I think.
Well, we found it's the most effective. As a matter of fact, even before I tell you the story, when I was teaching, I found that the students did not relate at all to the facts. It's very difficult, especially teaching a subject like Jewish history, which is major, so that they get the continuity of Jewish life. And when I started telling them stories, they could place the characters, they could place the role models, they can place the major connection between the holidays, between Jewish ethics, between man and God. It was wonderful. Anyway, this is a story on prayer. And the story is that there was a little innkeeper which Stetzel was a village that we think was almost entirely Jewish, and a great rabbi came to stay in the inn, and he sees that the innkeeper keeps the place immaculate, but he's not very learned, and when he prays, he makes a lot of mistakes, but he has a beautiful, beautiful smile on his face. So the rabbi goes over and he says, "You have to tell me what your secret is. Why are you smiling so much?" And the innkeeper repeats the story. He says, "Sure, you can see. I'm working very hard. I haven't had much of an education. I don't know too much. But before I go to sleep every night, I say, 'Master of the world.' I pray this way, 'Master of the world, if I fulfilled your will today, then wake me up tomorrow. If not, don't wake me up.'" So we see that even through prayer, even any person, any human being has a personal connection with God just through the words of prayer. And that's a story. That's
All
a
right.
story. It's an inspiring story in itself.
So tell us a little bit about your books. You have 4 books here, which I'm sure you've been working on for many, many years. And I understand you have more that are coming out in the future. Would you like to share with us a little bit about what went into, let's say, the first 2 books, for instance?
Well, Time for My Soul, which is the book over there, and A Touch of Heaven came about because we wanted to speak about Shabbos and the holidays, the Sabbath and the holidays, on a deeper level. Not just simply, Friday night you make Kiddush, which is wonderful,
Right.
but there's much more to it. So we came with the stories that actually illustrate the depth and the holiness of the holidays. And then we were always very concerned about the fact that ethics was not really a major part of life to many people. And so we took topics dealing with ethics and we found stories related to them, and they became very important. If I could just briefly tell you a little Sabbath story.
Great.
Okay.
Okay.
The poor schlepper, the poor carrier of goods, was by the name of Chatzkala. And Chatzkala loved the Sabbath, and he loved his people, but not everyone loved him so much, because he used to go around saying, you paid me with a little potato, Lekovat Shabbos, that's in honor of the Sabbath.
All
You
right.
gave me a carrot, I'll save it for Friday night. And the people in the community were really very disturbed with this kind of talk. What are you talking about, Lekovat Shabbos? So they gave him a name, Chatzkala Lekovat Shabbos. But it was not a name of distinction.
It was
but
derogatory.
That was derogatory, actually, yeah. So he dreamt that someday he would be able to leave this community and go where they would really appreciate him. One Friday night, a holy master came into town. And the holy master was blessing everyone, and Chatzkala, who was very, very humble in his own eyes and in the eyes of the world, sits at the back of the synagogue. And finally the Rebbe says to him, Chatzkala, come here, I want to talk to you.
Right.
He says, I heard that you're a wonderful person. He said, Rebbe, please, don't, what are you talking about? He says, what is your full name? He says, my name is Chatzkala Lekovit Shabbos. Chatzkala, in honor of the Sabbath. He says, Chatzkala, in honor of the Sabbath, what a beautiful name. He tells them this, the community laughs at me. So he says, Chatzkala, tell me, what do you know about the Jewish people? He says, I never had an opportunity to learn. But I know that we had a father Abraham, and we had a father Isaac, and a father Jacob, and we had Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah. Oh, Rebbe, they were wonderful people. They were wonderful people. And then we had a Moses who took us out of Egypt. And then we had, we went to after Moses took us out of Egypt, we came to Mount Sinai, and we got the Torah there. Did you know that, Rebbe? So the Rebbe says, yeah, I know that. Then he says, what's written in that Torah that's so important to you? He says, Rebbe, all the laws are there. He says, but what has kept us alive for 2,000 years? What has kept us alive through all this amount of exile and so on and so forth? He says, Rebbe, you don't know that either. Shabbos has kept us alive. The Sabbath has kept us alive. So the Rebbe said, you know what? You come with me. We're going to teach the world what Shabbos is all about, because I've never heard such a beautiful explanation. Simple, but very deep.
Right, you know, the Baal Shem Tov also, of course, told beautiful stories, and all of his stories, well, many of them, were to emphasize the beauty of the simple individual.
Simple, right.
A simple faith, a simple belief in God,
Right.
and a person who was able to act on that faith, in his mind, was greater sometimes than the greatest sage, because a sage keeps it up here.
Right.
What do stories do? Stories translate it down into the heart. And to be able to communicate ideas that hit into the heart is a
Right.
very unique ability, and that's really what stories accomplish, I think,
Right.
to
Yeah, absolutely.
many people.
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit more about the book then. What do you do? You go, first book I understand is about Shabbos and the holidays,
Right.
correct?
Holidays.
Second book is about what?
Ethical.
Doctor?
The second book is about ethical values, Jewish ethical values, and there's stories about hospitality to guests and acts of loving kindness.
Now, where do you draw these stories from?
Well, we go shopping to bookstores in Jerusalem.
Okay.
With sometimes we've gone with market baskets, and we go into the big bookstores. There's a wonderful bookstore in the old city called Ben Arza. It's right near the Holy Wall, and he knows already what we need. Sometimes he'll communicate with us, say, "Oh, you have to have this. Something new just came out," and we collect the stories, and most of them are in Hebrew. Some of them are in Yiddish. We translate them, and we put in the sources. In the new book that we're working on, it's very interesting. We decided instead of, because these two books have Torah sections and then the stories.
Okay.
In this book that we're working on, we're putting the Torah thought into the mouths of the characters. So the characters are actually doing the teaching without having a special section of the book.
In other words, the Torah portion of the week.
No, the Torah, the
Torah lesson that comes out of the story.
lesson, for example,
okay.
There's one character that comes to mind right now. There's a character that got very angry because he was very inhospitable. The person who he was trying to influence. So and he happened to be a teacher who was teaching his children. So we have the teacher screaming or yelling on paper, of course, at the person whose children he was teaching, saying, what kind of a role model are you? But meantime, there's a whole lesson in there that anger is really not a Jewish trait. So it comes across, and it takes a lot more time and effort to find the Torah thoughts that we want to put in, but there's no deadline for this book yet, so we're working
Okay.
on it.
Rabbi, tell me about maybe somebody who you feel you've affected through a story. Maybe a personal incident that happened to you.
Well, recently we submitted a story to the Hadassah magazine.
Okay.
It was printed in August-September issue. It's the story of the Jews of Zaleszyce in Poland, who were told 3 days before they were to die that on this specific day, which would be the Sabbath, they would all come to the the center of the town, and there they would die. Or they would be taken off into Treblinka or Auschwitz. They didn't know what to do. If you have 3 days to live, what do you do?
Exactly.
Right?
The eternal question.
What do you do? There was a tailor. They called him the Hinkadicka tailor. He's a hunchback. And his opinion was not held in great esteem. And he said to them, listen, all this arguing is foolish. We have 3 days to live. We're going to have 3 days of Yom Tov, 3 days of the holidays. And we're going to begin with Pesach. Tonight we're going to have a Seder. And tomorrow we're going to have the Haggadah, telling the stories of Passover. And the next day we're going to have Shavuos. We're going to stand at Mount Sinai. And we're going to hear the word of God. And then we're going to have Rosh Hashanah. We're going to stand before God on a new year. And Yom Kippur, we're going to ask God for our forgiveness. And the last day, we're going to come into the synagogue, and we're going to have Sukkot in the morning, and we're going to have Nila, the closing of the door, in the afternoon, after we've all recited Yizkor for the people who passed away, the prayer for the dead. And that's exactly what happened. And when they came into the synagogue, they asked the Hinkadicka tailor, where did you conceive of this idea? He says, I'll tell you the truth. I don't know if anyone will ever remember us, because that was the pain of all the martyrs. But I want them to know that we died as Jews, and that's the way we're going to die. Now, the reason this has such a tremendous impact, because we received many, many letters, is specifically, I could sum it up with one letter. We received a letter from a gentleman who, for Yom Kippur, happened to had a chavurah, a group of Jews, praying on Yom Kippur in Texas. And he read the story to them. After he finished the story, they stood up as one, and they all realized that they had to do one thing for Chatzkala and for all those Jews who died. They said Kaddish, the prayer for the dead.
Really?
Unbelievable, right? And it was like Chatzkala would say, that's really what it's all about. That's
Something
what
had hit them so deeply that they were moved to action.
That's right.
Interesting. I want to share with you a story I know also that I'll tell it to you the way I had heard it, which is an unbelievable story, showing how a story can have an effect on somebody. There was a Lubavitch rabbi who went to, I think it was St. Paul, Minnesota, and he was speaking for an interreligious group. And as a result, he had asked the Rebbe, the Lubavitch Rebbe, what story he should tell. And the Rebbe told him he should tell a story about charity. So he thought of a famous story concerning charity, which is a story about a famous person who had given a lot of charity in his town, and unfortunately, for whatever reason, people, of course, there were many people who came to him for help, and he was always helping them out. There was no problem whatsoever. But it was very silent. Nobody knew about it whatsoever. After he passed away, weeks went by, months went by. The amount of poor people who were in the town seemed to increase all of a sudden. People seemed like it was out of work, there was no employment, and they were all coming to the rabbi for help. So they didn't understand, he didn't understand what was going on. So he went to the butcher who used to give food to all these people. He went to the grocery store who was to give out food to all these people. Why all of a sudden did you stop giving anything to these people? So he said, I'll tell you what. The fact is that man who was the miser, known as the miser of town, who in fact, for whatever reason, because he was looked at as a miser, had been buried in the corner of the Jewish cemetery because nobody liked him whatsoever. Behind everybody's back, he was giving me the money to pay for all of these poor people in town. And then he went to the grocery man, and the grocery man told him the same thing. He went to other shops, and they all told him the same thing. He realized that this miser was in fact a very, very great individual, and then decreed that when he passes away, he wants to be buried next to the miser, in order that it should not be a sign of shame that the miser in fact was buried where he was buried. So he told this story in a public format, and afterwards an individual who happened to be a priest, in fact, came up to him and said, please tell me that story again. He waited until the very end after everybody had left. Sure enough, he told him the story. And then he asked him, where are you staying tonight? And he told him which hotel. He got a call 15 minutes after he arrived in the hotel asking, could I please come to the hotel? I have to talk to you about something. So I said, yes, okay. So he said, please, I want you to tell me the story again, which he did, and again, which he did a fourth time by now. And he asked him for details as far as making sure he shouldn't forget anything about the story. Well, it turns out he walked out, and the rabbi really didn't know what had transpired. But years later, he ended up visiting Jerusalem and was at the Holy Western Wall. And at that moment, somebody came up to him and said to him, Rabbi, how are you? Shalom Aleichem. Do you remember me? He looked at him and looked like a very traditional Jew, but he didn't recognize him whatsoever. And he said, no, I'm sorry, I don't recognize you. He said, I'm the priest who was in your room asking you that story. So he was shocked. He stepped back. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. And of course, he asked for an explanation. And the man told him, I'll tell you what. I was born during the war, and my parents had told me that I was a Jew, that I should never forget that I was a Jew. But in order to be able to protect my life, they put me in with a non-Jewish family in Poland, and I ended up growing up in a monastery. But they had always, during my childhood, I had always been told stories about my ancestors. I knew that I came from some type of special ancestry within Judaism. And of course, after I was a priest, I ended up remembering these stories, but really not relating to it whatsoever. And afterwards, when I heard that story, it clicked something inside of me that said, you know what, that's my story. That's my ancestor. And something started working within me very, very deeply, and eventually it brought me to look into my Jewish roots again and find out what it meant to be a Jew. And here I am. So that's the power of a story.
Unbelievable.
And we hear stories, of course, all the time of ways that people, we can hear a story. I mean, how many people out in our audience read a book? They hear a story. The story is in the book, or whatever it might be. Stories are very, very powerful vehicles. But tell me more about different great rabbis that you've studied who have been unbelievable storytellers.
Well, there's another story.
Oh,
Always
okay.
a story. This one is called Joy. He
Listen,
brings
there's a saying that a Jew always answers a question with another question. But in this case, you answer a question with a story.
A story.
Okay.
It's a story.
And she also says that before she speaks, she wants to say a few words.
Right.
Okay.
And well, we've studied that one of the tenets of the Hasidic movement, which was founded by the Baal Shem Tov, by Rabbi Yisrael ben Eliezer, the Baal Shem Tov, was the emphasis of Jewish life on joy. And it was a response to what was going on in the Jewish world at that time, but that's for another time. The story is very simply one of the disciples of the Baal Shem Tov, whose name was Yaakov Yitzchak Halevi, and let's just call him the rabbi. And
Very
he lived
famous
in,
rabbi.
we'll just call him the rabbi in this
Okay.
story, because it's a long, complicated name. He lived in the town of Lublin. And people came to him from all over for advice, because that's really what they did. The rabbis were the role models and the people who inspired them and taught them and cared for them. So one day there was a group of students that were coming to visit the rabbi, and they had hired a wagon driver to take them. And the wagon driver himself said, you know, I've been trying to get to see this particular rabbi for such a long time, but I keep going back and forth. I'm trying to earn money, and I didn't have a chance. I want to give him a note. So the student said, we'll give him the note. So he drops them off, and he turns around because he's going back to pick up another fare. And they walk in, the first thing, and they give this rabbi the note. And he holds it up to the light, and he looks, and he says, the person who gave you this note is a human being who brings joy wherever he goes. And the students looked at him. How did he know? The wagon driver turned around and went back. How did he know? So they said to him, but Rabbi, what's on the note? This person, the wagon driver, brings joy wherever he goes. And they didn't understand what was going on. So as soon as they finished whatever their business was with him, and they got his advice, whatever the problem was they came from, they said, we have to go to the marketplace because we have to find out what it is that this wagon driver, who must have gone to the marketplace to pick up another fare, what he's doing. And they get to the marketplace, and they're singing and dancing, and it sounds like there's a wedding. And they see in the middle, the wagon driver is dancing like to the heaven. He's so happy. And they say to him, well, what did you do that the rabbi says you bring joy wherever you go, and here you're dancing to heaven? He says, wait, when the dance is over, I'll tell you. Okay, the music stops, and he finishes, and he says, you know, when I got to the marketplace, there was a wedding going on, and the groom did not have a new prayer shawl. And he said, I can't get married because they're going to make fun of me. I took all the money from the fare that you gave me, and I went and I bought him a new prayer shawl. And this was the most beautiful thing that I could do, and that's why I'm so happy. And when the rabbi said, I bring joy wherever I go, this is what I did with the money.
Very nice. Very, very nice. stories that really teach us a little bit of how we can draw within ourselves and go a little bit beyond our limits when it comes to love or compassion or concern for another fellow human being. Tell me, can you tell us a phone number where people can get in touch with both of you in order to be able to find out either about more stories, to verify perhaps a story, or to find out where they can get your books? I'm sure there'll be some people who'd like to follow up. What is your phone number?
Well, our phone number is 516-374-6861.
Okay, can you say that again just in case anybody had to run to get their pencil?
Okay, 516-374-6861.
All right.
But it's easier to reach us by email. After that Hadassah Magazine article appeared, we had so many email letters, and I really answered every single one, and I really will. The email is Magidim, MAGGIDIM, @AOL.com.
Okay, Magidim, of course, means?
The storytellers.
All
What
right.
else?
In Hebrew.
It's a Hebrew word. It means the storytellers.
Right, okay. Well, I want to thank you very, very much for being with us today. It's been a really educational experience and a lot of fun. I hope our viewers also had a lot of fun in listening to your stories.
Thank you.
And the fact is, of course, that there are so many stories out there. There are books that you have. There are books that Art School prints. There are now a tremendous amount of series of books, in fact, that are put out by Lubavitch, which are stories about the Rebbe.
Yes.
The Rebbe, of course, had many unbelievably miraculous stories of personal experiences that people had
Absolutely.
that they related and, of course, have been written down, and hundreds of them. And stories, again, inspire. And I think we all need a little bit of that in our lives, because inspiration is something that, we become very coarse in certain ways as far as doubting certain things or questioning, and we're constantly bombarded by all types of very, very coarse information out there. To get a nice story from a tzaddik, from a righteous person, from a person who really represents something, a person who's for real, a person who embodies morals and ethics, and to hear about how they live through the stories that are told about them is truly an inspiration. So keep up your work, and I hope you have a lot of success.
Thank you
Thank you
very
so
much.
much.
Thank you very
inviting
much.
us.
It's been a
Thank
pleasure. It's been a pleasure. In the meantime, I just want to thank you all for joining us. And remember, go out there and do a mitzvah. Do something good to make your world and your community better. And tell somebody a story. Tell your children a story. If you have grandchildren, tell them stories. And great-grandchildren, for sure, write about your own life. Tell the story of a way that's going to really have meaning. Because in the old days, Jews used to give not a will of their possessions. They used to make an ethical will of stories that meant something to them, of those things that they really stand for in their life. And those are the things that really make you a person. So think of a nice story to tell about yourself, because that really will express to your family something about you that nothing else could possibly express. Great, take care, keep those mitzvahs up, and we'll see you next week, same time, same station, at the Jewish Spotlight.
Simchu besimchas hagiulu, hine Moshiach bo.